Welcome everyone to this webinar on scenario planning case COVID-19. My name is Hans-Peter Siefen. I'm the co-founder and chairman of the board at Nordic Business Forum and also a board member at Oslo Business Forum. And I will be doing my best to moderate this webinar session in a value-creating way for all of you who are following. Here with me, I have Risto Siilasmaa, the founder and chairman of F-Secure and chairman of Nokia. Welcome.
Great to be here, and thanks so much for coming up with the idea of organizing this.
Thanks for your time. This is really valuable for everyone on the line, I believe. In Risto's recently published book, Transforming Nokia, Risto lifts up scenario planning as a vital part of strategy work. And of course, now with the situation caused by the coronavirus outbreak, all of the CEOs, board members, chairpersons, and business owners really need to be on top of multiple different scenarios and in multiple aspects on how long this situation lasts, how the world will look like during it, after it, and so on. And indeed, we are truly grateful that you wanted to dedicate time to share your wisdom on this topic for every one of us. And we actually have quite a big number of people on the line. We got just a moment ago, it was just under 1,900 registrations for this webinar. And when I checked before the lunch break today, these registrations were from 53 different countries altogether. And of them, I believe we have the majority on air right now. Let's quickly make sure all of you on the other end hear as well, and everything works both directions by trying out a poll. So we see that you actually can use the tools on the platform and you seem to also hear as well. So in front of you should now have the poll on the screen and just pick whichever option feels best, and we'll move on with the results also in a few moments. While you answer, during the webinar, also later on, you may send us questions through the Q&A functionality. So there is a Q&A button on the screen. And please also upvote questions from others, the ones you like most, and we'll be able to cover some of the top questions during this hour. But yes, so we are almost ready to go, and I will be ending the poll so we see how the results also were. They seem to be still building up, but while that happens, we'll get going with Risto. So let's get started. Risto, how did you come across with the concept of scenario planning in the first place?
Well, scenario planning is as old as human beings are. It's a natural part of how we think. And the military has been using scenario planning as a safe way to practice for all sorts of situations that they might come across. And I actually first bumped into scenario planning during my military service as well. So this is a very old way of preparing oneself for all sorts of possible futures.
Yes, indeed. Can you describe the process?
Sure. The scenario planning is actually very topical, not just because of the COVID-19 situation, but overall today, because I think the world is becoming a much more complex place. And complexity means the combination of unpredictability and a high level of complicatedness. So when things are surprising you and they are at the same time very complicated, of course, you cannot just have one single plan. Mm-hmm. You have to be prepared for all sorts of situations that you cannot tackle with a single plan. And therefore, it's natural to think in terms of scenarios, in my opinion. And of course, the first thing when you start is identify scenarios. And we will talk more about how that's done in a moment. Once you have identified relevant scenarios for your family, for yourself, for your company, whatever entity you are thinking about, you need to think about what kind of data would tell me which one of those scenarios will be happening. And for each scenario, you can identify some data points that will help you understand how likely this scenario is becoming. And then you need to take action. You need to proactively think about how do I get as much of that data as possible? How do I buy it? How do I source it from third parties? How do I generate it myself? How do I do surveys for my customers? How do I take action in order to understand which scenario will be happening? Maybe the data will tell you that it's none of the scenarios that you have identified earlier, and therefore you will just add new scenarios as you go on. And then when you sort of have an idea of how likely each scenario is, you also think about, okay, which ones are favorable to me and which ones are negative for me. And then, of course, you want the favorable ones to happen and you want to prevent the negative ones. So again, you create action plans for each scenario. And of course, you spend more time on the most likely scenarios. But you don't forget the unlikely scenarios. You spend at least a little bit of time thinking about them as well, because there are great benefits from doing that. And when you have action plans, you'll just give those as responsibilities for your organization. Or if you think about the family, then perhaps your family members. And you start executing. And all the time as you execute, you'll also learn. You learn what works, what doesn't work. And you need to collect that information and then sort of rinse and repeat. You again think about, do I have the right scenarios? Are the likelihoods the right ones? Is the data that I can gather the points that best help me understand what's going to happen? And as things change, you can also change the way you have resourced the different scenarios in terms of executing the action plans behind them. And it's as simple as that.
What are the benefits for doing all of this?
Well, I think there are multiple benefits. And one benefit is, of course, that you are less likely to be surprised. Because you tell your team that, hey, let's think about all the possible things that might happen to us. Or what kind of a world will we be in 6 months, 12 months, 36 months, 10 years' time, whatever the time frame. And when you do that, you sort of force yourself to think about the unlikely outcomes as well. You can even help that along by appointing someone, for example, saying that you have now the role of being very negative. You have the right to think about the nightmare scenarios for us. Because typically people are unwilling to be the negative ones. We all want things to work out. So when we start brainstorming, we all come up with positive things. But if you tell somebody that now it's your right, it's your duty to focus on the negative outcomes, it helps. And let me give you an example. I'll use Nokia as an example because most of us remember the time when Nokia was the world's largest mobile phone manufacturer. And Nokia had at its best over 60% market share in smartphones. These were before Apple and before Android. And Nokia had brought the market understanding to the level of science. So Nokia employed scientists who focused on understanding consumer behavior and what consumers think and what they need. And Nokia did a lot of surveys. And in these surveys, over 90% of people said that they don't want a touch phone. So they wanted a numeric keypad, they wanted a foldable QWERTY keyboard, or they wanted a BlackBerry type of a device. And therefore Nokia rightly so assumed that, okay, the touch device market will be max 10%. So we need to put 90% of our effort into these other categories. But if Nokia had done scenario planning at that time and somebody would have been given the role of thinking about the nightmare scenarios, and if that person would have said that, okay, what would happen if 100% of the smartphone market will become touch in, let's say, 3 years' time? Of course, it would have been very difficult to think of as a credible scenario at that time, because all data pointed to the other direction. But Nokia might have thought about, okay, what would that mean for us? And the answer might have been that we could be dead. And then if you think about a very low likelihood scenario, but with a very drastic outcome, you might have taken some action, a little bit more action than would otherwise have happened. So that's one benefit. Also, it sometimes might be very valuable to realize that a certain outcome does not exist in any of the scenarios. And very topical thing for the time being, on the 16th of February, actually quite late, thinking about the virus outbreak, I concluded that I don't see any scenario where the stock markets would go up over the next, several months. I was not smart enough to say that they will definitely go down, but I thought that's a fairly reasonable likelihood. But I saw no scenario where they could go up. So assume that you know that the stock market will not go up. What would you do? Why own shares in a market that will not go up? If it stays the same, then selling all your shares and then maybe buying them back in 3 months' time, you are where you began. No losses, no winnings. But if it can go down and you have sold, then you can buy back at a much lower price. So again, thinking about the scenarios and seeing something that is not happening in any scenario may create an action item list by itself. And vice versa also, what exists in all scenarios. So right now for all businesses, cash is king. There is no scenario for any company where cash would not be the most important thing, the highest priority. Even if governments are providing assistance, and that will help you to get some cash. But if you run out of cash now, it may be the death of your company. So again, in all scenarios, there's this one element. So it becomes automatically a high priority. And then finally, as you acknowledge that there are a number of different scenarios that you have to be prepared for, and some of them are bad, some of them are good, you sort of release your team from the curse of a single plan. And the curse of a single plan is one where people feel that this is all we have. If this doesn't work, we have nothing left. Therefore, they may become hesitant of bringing up data points that would suggest our plan will not work out, because you have nothing left. If you have 3 different plans and you get information that the first plan actually becomes very unlikely, people are more likely to talk about those data points because you have 2 plans left, 2 scenarios left that you are working for. So it makes people fearless, because even for the most negative scenarios, you have a plan. And every time you have a plan and you are actually taking actions, you are more in control. And what we fear is not a particular scenario, it's more the fear of the unknown, fear of the uncontrollable. We have no control over it. But if we are executing a plan, we have some control. And people are more motivated, they believe in the future. So a lot of positives, sort of side effects from the process itself, in addition to actually running a better business.
Yes. I feel like improvising now a bit, since you cover in your book extensively a term called paranoid optimism. And what you just said brings to my mind the concept of paranoid optimism. Jim Collins also has a concept called Stockdale's paradox in his books. And just to bring everyone on board, according to Stockdale's paradox, one must never confuse faith that we will survive in the end with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. And I will just briefly share one small section from the book where Jim is interviewing Stockdale, and Stockdale was in prison during the Vietnam War for a lengthy time. And the dialogue goes like this in the book. Who didn't make it out? Oh, that's easy, he said. The optimists. The optimists? I don't understand, said Collins. The optimists, oh, they were the ones who said, we are going to be out by Christmas. And Christmas would come and go. Then they would say, we are going to be out by Easter. And Easter would come and go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. So what's the difference in between paranoid optimism and Stockdale's paradox?
Well, I don't think there's actually much difference. For me, paranoid optimism means that you are quite focused on the worst possible outcomes, which enables you to have a plan against them. And that gives you a reason to be an optimist, because you are in control. So sort of in Stockdale's situation, you prepare for being in the prison for 3 years or whatever, or for an indeterminate time, and you plan, how will I cope with that? And then you feel in control, even if by Christmas you are not at home. And in business terms, it means that you are free to talk about the worst possible outcomes. You create a plan, and you definitely are more likely to survive than if you had no plan at all, and it would be forbidden to even talk about the topic.
Very true. So what's difficult about scenario planning?
Well, the most difficult thing in my experience is finding the right scenarios. And it's especially difficult when you talk about the long term, because we so easily tend to look for the scenarios from the macroeconomy. So, for example, in a hypothetical company, they might think that, okay, the most important thing happening in the world before COVID-19 was China's rise. So they will create a dimension of how much China will grow. And then one scenario is that they will grow 3%, and one scenario is that they will grow 6% per year for the next 8 years. And then the fact is that it's relatively irrelevant for the company whether China grows 3% or 6%. And it doesn't help you at all to find the right scenarios for your own company. Oftentimes for the long term, it's better to not look for a sort of a continuum like China's growth low to high, but rather discrete outcomes that are relevant for your company. So you think about your own business, and for example, for your business, which is organizing country-level events, one question might be whether people will come to these events physically or whether it's the online world that will take over. One question might be whether you are the leading European player, and then you need to be in France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and the UK. And how would you do that? So you have a scenario, okay, I will be the market leader in all those countries. And then you start thinking sort of in a future back kind of a way, how would that happen? What would I need to do in order to be that? And then, of course, asking yourself whether it would be a good thing to be that. And then you have some other scenarios. Maybe you invade North America and you put all your eggs in that basket. But find something that is really relevant for yourself.
Yeah, you actually write a lot about this future back point of view and exercise in the book as well. Is that actually a tool also now in this situation to prepare kind of for being ready when things go well forward again?
Well, absolutely. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of helping the team and their brains to look at the situation from multiple angles. I mean, there's no magic. There's no tool that will provide you with the best possible strategy. It's all a question of the teamwork, the information that you have, the creativity that you have. And these are all tools that are supposed to help you look at the topic from all angles. So future back means that you imagine yourself in a, let's say, through this scenario thinking, imagine yourself as the leading European vendor in your business. And then you come back from that position after 10 years, 1 year, and think, okay, where am I in year 9 and year 8? And you come back to today, and suddenly it seems more possible for you to actually become the market leader in Europe than you would have ever thought if you had just started from today and gone incrementally to the future.
Yes.
Yes, but when you think incrementally, you rarely revolutionize anything. But then it's all about iterating. So you need to think both ways and iterate. And then you may come up with a number of plans or scenarios that you can start exploring. But it's not just future back, and it's not just incrementally to the future.
How deep should one go into each of these scenarios?
Well, let's take today as an example, this COVID situation. Using this stock market language, we might think about whether the world will recover in a V-shaped way. So now we are in the deep decline, but then we'll go up as quickly. In terms of infections, in terms of restrictions for travel and so forth. I mean, I saw a statistic recently from China, which in addition to coal being burnt at 70 to 80% of the normal rate at the moment and pollution coming back up, but also home sales had come up significantly, which was the most striking data point for me because it means that people are starting to plan their own future again and taking risks, buying homes. if there's a second wave of the pandemic in China, then of course we'll go back down. And that would be then a W-shaped scenario. In Europe, in the US, we still might go into an U-shaped form where we'll stay at the low level for a prolonged period of time. Or even worse, it can be more like an L-shaped. So how do we prepare for those? Will restrictions last for 3, 6, 9, 12, 18 months or what? We don't know. So why not try to prepare for a range of these? And when you're trying to figure out what could happen, you also need to reach out to your employees. And a very good question could be asking your employees, what will be the next big thing that we will miss as a company?
Okay.
Because typically your employees know. They know more than you. And if there's something that is sort of brewing, but we are not reacting, we are not on top of our game, the management team doesn't know about that, the board doesn't know about it, but the employees will know about it. And if you ask, they will give you a list, and then you can start doing scenarios based on those. So finding the right question is difficult. For the short term, it's much easier.
Yes.
And just as an example from Nokia's history, when in 2012 Microsoft announced that they want to become a devices and services company. And at that time, Nokia had committed to Microsoft's mobile platform with Windows Phone. And the idea that Microsoft would become a devices company themselves, whereas we were in a binding relationship with them, and if they would become a devices company, they would become a competitor. And that would be a completely unbalanced relationship. So that was a big threat for us. And then they launched the Surface tablet, which was the first PC that Microsoft had ever done. And they sort of went into the business of their biggest partners. So what did we do? We started thinking, okay, if Microsoft wanted to come to the mobile handset market, how could they do that? And it's easy to come up with scenarios. One scenario is, of course, that they will build it themselves. And then we can start analyzing, how would they do that? How would we find out if they were actually doing it already? What action can we take to find out if they do it or if they are planning to do it? Then the other scenario could be that they will buy someone and they will come to the market much quicker than building it themselves, which would take several years. So who could they buy? Well, they could try to buy us. Is that good or bad for us? They could buy HTC. Well, that would definitely be bad. Because then they would come to the market, they would be our competitor, and they would do it very quickly with an existing product portfolio. So that would be a really bad situation. So how do we prevent that? And how do we actively go out for data that would show us whether they are already planning to do that? And that is just an example of how having a clear question, i.e. what will Microsoft do, will immediately help you identify a range of scenarios. And then you just start going through the process as we discussed earlier.
Yes. So how would you yourself, how would you go about scenario planning in this kind of time, case COVID-19 and all of its upcoming aftermath?
Well, I would basically apply the process exactly as we have discussed. So the key thing is to find or identify the relevant scenarios from your point of view. And you can use all the ideas that we have discussed here to identify those scenarios. Once you have the scenarios, think about how do I prove which ones of these scenarios are actually happening? What data will tell me that? How do I get as much of that type of data as possible? What action can I take right now, today and tomorrow, in order to increase the likelihood of the positive scenarios and decrease the likelihood of the negative scenarios? And I believe that right now is a moment in time where we really need to sort of hold hands as humanity. So more than under normal circumstances, what is good for you is also good for me. And vice versa, what is good for me is more likely to be good for you as well than in normal competitive circumstances. But there's also an opportunity to reach out and do things for the common good.
Yes. This question is from one of our viewers, not yet from the Q&A tab, but from social media earlier. He writes, it would be interesting to hear also about how to choose the right scenario to execute.
As we have discussed, you should not. You should not try to choose the right scenario to execute because you don't know what is the right scenario. You know what seems to be the most likely scenario at this time, but you need to be suspicious of that because it may change and you need to challenge that all the time. You may know what is the most pleasant scenario from your point of view. And of course, that's the one that you want to promote. But you can't rely on that one scenario actually playing out. So don't choose the right scenario. Choose a reasonable number of scenarios that you can work with. And then apply your resources in a sensible way across those scenarios. And be ready to kill a scenario when the data shows you that it's not going to happen, and create new ones when you get data that suggests that maybe something else is happening than what you thought before.
In not necessarily only in this case, but do you actually keep a backlog on the scenarios which you already abandoned, the ones that already expired? I mean, the world could change kind of. There could be a W. And do you keep a backlog? Do you have a system for that yourself?
Well, I would say that in almost all, at least corporate cases, when you identify a scenario, there's a document trail because you start planning. So the scenarios won't disappear. Maybe for a private individual, if you just think about your own life and you create scenarios, maybe you'll only do them in your mind, and then you won't have any audit trail of the old scenarios. But I actually have a habit of creating lists. And I use OneNote. You could use any tool, but I have probably hundreds of lists for various purposes. I have a list for what does entrepreneurship mean for me? What does good leadership mean for me? And I have a list for great quotes. So when I am planning a speech and I want to, add a joke, I have a list of hundreds of sort of one-liners that I have found to be insightful, and so forth and so forth. So I definitely have a list of the scenarios that I have abandoned. But that's just me. Other people would work differently.
Well, I think that could be a wise thing to do, definitely. I'll take one from the Q&A tab now. This is by Mikko Alasaarela. What permanent changes do you expect from this global crisis?
I think this is a time when everybody becomes an expert. And it's kind of okay that we are all keen on understanding and proposing things related to the current circumstances. But I think we also need to admit what we don't know. And obviously I don't know. There are some things that are very, very likely. For example, remote work will be thought of differently. The testing infrastructure for viral and bacterial outbreaks in various countries will be very different after this.
Sure.
And you can just continue that list. So this is a little bit like scenario planning as well. You know what's happening now, and there's a number of things that you know will be different after this. And then there's a long list of possible things that will be different. And actually this is food for scenario planning, because you might identify some things that are definitely changing, which actually impact your business. Mm-hmm. Maybe there are opportunities for you. So this is a worthwhile exercise, but I don't have any special wisdom. I hope that cybersecurity will be identified and understood to be of the level of importance that I believe and know that it should be, but it's not necessarily prioritized that highly. But the world is becoming a very connected place where disruption in one place will always lead to disruptions in other places. And we have sort of optimized the system to such a high level that our ability to withstand damage to a particular part of the system is getting pretty low. As we will be seeing now that some logistics chains will not work as well as they used to. And for example, in Finland, Finland is an island. That's what we say here in Finland, because most of the imports and exports come to Finland via ship. And even if we actually are part of the continent, we are not an island, but from the logistics point of view, we are. And if the passenger ferries will stop moving between Finland and Sweden, Finland and Estonia, then a key freight carrying capacity will disappear. And that would cause severe changes in Finnish consumption.
Sure. You have been in multiple different roles. You have been founding companies, you have been leading companies as a CEO, you have been a board member, chairman of the board now at F-Secure and Nokia also, and you have invested in companies. How is the board's role changing in these kind of extremely difficult times?
Well, in a way, it should not change that much, because I strongly believe that there needs to be the CEO and his or her team that needs to feel they have ownership of running the company. They share ownership for the strategy, whereas they do the strategic planning, but then they choose this strategy together with the board. But for the execution, they need to feel they own it. And in a crisis situation, the board might very easily start to become more operational, and that is not good. It doesn't mean that the normal challenging and supporting would not happen. So the board needs to challenge the management team in good times as well as in bad times. And maybe we do it slightly differently in a crisis. But fundamentally, the roles should not change that much.
Yeah, Ray Dalio, for example, in his book Principles, writes about the differences between managing, micromanaging, and not managing, which is also a bad thing, not managing. What should one be most careful with in this kind of a time as, for example, as the chairman of the board? You kind of course, answered already that it's no different from anything else, but...
Well, the time horizons do change in a crisis, and that's understandable and it's okay. So when during peacetime you think about is our competitive positioning and what we are doing to enhance that and build that over the next 3 to 5 years, do we have the right direction? In wartime, you may start thinking, okay, how do we survive the next 6 months or 3 months? Or for many small companies today, it's even maybe a question of weeks. And of course, the boards and the chairman's focus changes based on the situation you live through. And that's how it should be. So when the board challenges the management on are your plans taking into account everything that is important, in peacetime it may be about 3-5 years. In wartime it may be about 3 months, 6 months. And the time spent on different topics also changes. Now much of the time is spent for the short term. Not completely ignoring the long term, of course. But the balance shifts.
Yes. I'll do one from the Q&A tab again from Kai Kaasalainen. Can you recommend some best practice tools, methods for different phases of scenario work? For example, now it went somewhere. For example, signal monitoring, turning punch of information to understanding how to integrate to daily management, that kind of things. You spoke about lists.
Yeah, I think I have yet to see a tool that would be really great for the specific purpose of scenario planning. There might be some tools, I haven't heard about them. So it's rather finding tools for the various parts of the process that I have experienced. And the tools are the same tools that we use for other knowledge work. So it could be Slack, which might be a great tool for particular parts of, let's say, scenario identification. And it might be list management tools for idea creation. It might be very, very rudimentary, normal, everyday tools. But if somebody online knows of a great tool for the specific purpose of scenario planning, I'd be delighted to hear about them and try them out.
The next question is actually kind of about a tool. This was from social media before the webinar started. Hans-Peter and Risto, ideas on how to co-source brain power to this scenario work would be great. In other words, how to mobilize folks in various parts of the extended enterprises to boldly and positively contribute.
Well, I think this is actually a great moment to do that because we are traveling less, we are spending less time at the airports and cars. We actually have more time to think. And it's important that we connect with each other so that we don't all think in our own bubble. And we need to somehow create the human touch even during this time of remote work so that this joint co-creation works in a good way. And again, I would welcome a sharing of ideas on this. One very simple idea that I believe in is for teams to have a shared coffee break online. So I know some teams in the companies that I work with where every day at 2 o'clock there's a coffee break. And everybody will bring a cup of coffee next to the PC and they will just be like in the cafeteria. And these moments will motivate or at least reduce the negative impact of being alone so much. But otherwise, this is normal people leadership and management. We need to show we care. We need to show that your ideas are important. We need to be clear about priorities. We need to be clear about goals. And hold people accountable, just like normally.
Yes. How often should one carefully think through and update the scenarios in this kind of a time?
Well, that depends on the time frame. Shell is famous for their scenario work, and their scenarios typically are 30 years, 40 years, even 50 years into the future. And they have a very, very heavy machinery. They invite 200 top experts in various fields to come and join a conference of several days. And then they physically spend time together and work out a very long-term scenario. Of course, you don't need to update that very often. But if you have a scenario for the next 6 months, then you might need to update it every week.
And I mean, there is new information on the outbreak and how it evolves every day now, new regulations. What would you recommend? How often should one dive into the scenarios and update and think through them again?
Well, when you get data that is in conflict with what you expected, then you need to stop and think. But if we look at the data that we have received over the last week in terms of infections and deaths, I don't think there has been anything surprising. But then governmental action is something that you really cannot predict. So things have changed in those terms.
Yes.
And maybe for a number of companies, those are relevant enough for them to say that, okay, let's stop and rethink.
Yes. All right. Then one also from the social media in advance. How to keep up the spirits. First emotions seem to be over, adrenaline is declining, and we all may be heading toward a grey monotony and lack of sense. How to keep up spirits?
Well, I think we touched on that with the virtual coffee breaks and showing that we care and showing that the team is important. Being interested in the people close to us. And, during the coffee breaks, maybe you can say that every day one of the team members will walk through his or her home workplace, i.e. the apartment, with the video camera, showing that this is my home, I work here, and here's my kitchen, and here's my coffee machine, and that gives that personal touch. We just need to come up with ways of managing the community of our employees. And of course, it may be slightly different in a company such as Nokia with 100,000 employees in basically every country in the world, and then a very small company. But if everybody works remotely, then we are all alone. And I'm a bit worried about that feeling of being alone.
Sure, yes. One extremely practical, detailed question from Elina Liehu. Certainly you have done scenario plans how long this virus situation will last. What is the longest timeline in your scenarios as the most pessimistic scenario?
Well, then we would first need to define what does how long this will last mean. And the virus will be here after 50 years, most likely, won't disappear. The restrictions to travel, various scenarios. If it's a W, then we might have restrictions for travel in 12 months. But they might have been released in between.
Yes.
I mean, China, again, is a country that we should be looking at very closely. and hopefully we get reliable data from China. But last night we heard that no new infections identified. So of course that would be very, very, very positive news. I believe in data. So I believe in testing. Unfortunately, the Finnish authorities don't fully agree. But in some other countries like South Korea, they very much agree. I think if you could test every single Finn or every single Swede, and you identify the ones that have carried the virus, isolate them, they won't be able to infect anybody. There will be some people who will get an infection from surfaces or from wherever, but if you can do another round of testing everybody after a month, I mean, for me, not being a doctor, not being an expert in virology, just an engineer, in my engineer's brain, that would mean that if you do testing on a large scale and every time isolate the people who carry the virus, you will recover quite quickly. Then, of course, other countries do it differently, and there will be, once travel is brought back, you'll get new infections.
Yes.
But testing, in my opinion, would be very important. But who am I to say?
Yes. How should one, or how could one, as an owner of an SME, perhaps participate if he or she is not a part of the board of directors?
Well, the word owner, of course, is very important. If you are an owner, you feel ownership. It means that you feel responsible. And if you have that feeling, then you'll have to find a way to contribute. If you have decided not to be a board member, if you are the majority shareholder, you are the founder, or a major shareholder at least, then it has been your choice pretty much not to be on the board. And maybe you want to rethink that. But if you are not a board member, you're not part of the management team, then you can't start interfering too much. Then maybe the AGM, maybe there's a meeting once a year outside the AGM for the major shareholders. But you shouldn't be there too often unless you want to join the board or want to become a member of the management team.
So become one, and then you can contribute well.
Yeah. If the team feels that you can contribute, it might be that you feel you can, but they don't agree, and it will get more complicated.
That's true. Heikki Toivonen has asked, what do you think about these two corona scenarios? Pretty difficult ones. One, very severe depression. Corona will end during the spring. Okay, and two, extreme severe depression. Corona will end after summertime, probably. What do you think? How likely do you think we will go into a very severe or even an extreme depression?
Well, again, I believe in experts. So for the viral outbreak, we should rely on the best experts who unfortunately don't have a clear point of view yet. For the impact on the economy, again, we should rely on the experts who unfortunately, again, don't have a firm point of view or a united point of view. So therefore, we have to be prepared for all of that and any of those. I think it's very clear that the economy will be depressed for quite a long time. This will not be a quick recovery overall, even if we recover from the viral outbreak, but as societies, it will take time for us to recover. That's a given fact.
So have you abandoned the V scenario for not just the virus, but the larger effects of it yourself already at this point?
Well, this has been a very quick way down. And I'm very sure that the way up will not be as steep.
Yes. We are not yet in the end, but closing to the end. And before moving to the last question, which will be about crisis communication, maybe two, we'll see how quick we are. I would like to cover one thing on from Nordic Business Forums and Oslo Business Forums side. Now the situation is indeed different than it was still in January, and to support you and your organization's development amongst all the days of remote work in many cases, we have upgraded our digital products and offering. You are able to watch tens of speeches with summaries and now also key questions attached on our new online or rebuilt online platform, which we have by both Nordic Business Forum and separately by Oslo Business Forum as well. The platform will also have now, during the future months, monthly live webinars from, for example, Erin Meyer, Seth Godin, Robbie Kellman-Baxter, and many others each month. Now, those of you who already have a ticket or a live stream license to our next events will have access free of charge automatically, and we are sending instructions to the ticket purchasers email later today or already today perhaps. If you are now listening and you don't have a ticket or a live stream license from us, you can of course get a ticket for our next event in September for Oslo or Helsinki or Stockholm. Or you can also get access to the digital library alone without a ticket or a live stream license. Well, the live stream license would then actually automatically be a part of it as well. You can get one for yourself or even grant access for your whole organization or a certain group of it. We have new packages for these. And I'm just now opening a poll, which is now open in your screen. If you wish, if you want to get a minus 15% discount code together with some more information, tick yes, and we will send a discount code for you in your email during the upcoming days. So that's hopefully something that could add value to you in these difficult times.
And by the way, what you are now doing is, of course, from your own business point of view, you're trying to adjust to the new situation.
Yes, very much so also.
And that's exactly what we have been talking about the whole hour. And just brings me to mind when I asked you earlier, how did you come up with the idea of organizing this webinar? And you said that 15 minutes before I contacted you.
Yeah.
And that, for me, that's really the part of being an entrepreneur. You come up with an idea and you don't call a committee to think about it in 2 weeks' time, but you act on it right away.
Yes.
And I think it's a good example of sort of the power of entrepreneurship in big companies and small companies.
Yes, definitely so. And we'll move to the last question or two about crisis communication. So this is also from social media before this webinar started. I wouldn't forget crisis communication in the context of both internal and external communication. I'm sure there is a few in such roles wondering what to do and what to say.
Well, for me, 3 things that I feel personally are the most important. One is never lie. I mean, don't get into a situation where you have to lie. Say as much as you can. Really push the boundary and be as transparent as possible. And then when there are things that you can't say, if at all possible, explain why. And if I think about the communication by the various governments over the last weeks, I think some of them have lied or misled. I think they have not necessarily been transparent at all times, so minimized the information rather than maximized it. And when they haven't been able to be transparent, they have not always explained why. And it's so much easier not to get information when you understand why they are not sharing it. So I think very simple 3 things that would help a lot.
Yes, very wise words. And with this, we are exactly at 4 p.m. and it's time to end. Thank you, Risto Siilasmaa.
Thank you.
First of all, for this conversation, and thank you for everyone on the line. Take care, all the best, and bye for now from Helsinki.